Well, today is June 14th, and I don't know if you know what today is on the calendar. Today is Flag Day. Thank you. Yeah, it's Flag Day. The other day, Henry said to me, "What is Flag Day and what are we supposed to do?" And I said, well, quite frankly, I don't know what you're supposed to do on Flag Day, but maybe, you knew it was Flag Day. That's what you do on Flag Day. Lovely. Wonderful. I can tell you a little bit about it, though, because I did go and look it up. It commemorates the 1777 adoption of the flag of the United States. It's not a federal holiday, but back in 1916, President Woodrow Wilson issued a presidential proclamation that designated June 14th as Flag Day. But how about a little Pittsburgh trivia? Everything relates back to Pittsburgh. And so here's your Pittsburgh trivia. It was William T. Kerr, a native of Pittsburgh, who founded the American Flag Day Association of Western Pennsylvania and then in 1888, and then became the national chairman of the American Flag Day Association, and he served in that position for 50 years. So it is a Pittsburgher that pushed for Flag Day to be this holiday. And so that's a little bit of history for you. History is much debated these days, isn't it? What gets included in the history books and what gets left out? Who gets to tell history? Why is this event featured and not that event? Why this person and not that person? Why do we remember this and not remember that? And history often focuses on kings and generals and important people and exciting dramatic events. And as you read through the Bible, we should understand that we're reading a book of history. God has recorded for us the history of the world, and it's appropriate to, as you read through it, to be like, well, I wonder why it includes this story but not this one, or I wonder why it talks about this civilization and not that civilization. And one day, when we're in God's presence there, we can ask him some of these questions that haunt us. But for what we're doing right now as a church is we're working our way through some history. We're in the book of Nehemiah, and we're in approximately 445 BC. 445 years before Jesus was born here on the earth. The temple in Jerusalem was in ruins. The walls of Jerusalem were in ruins. And the people of God were living in exile in foreign lands. And the people of God began returning back to Jerusalem. And in the book of Nehemiah, we learn about how they rebuilt the walls around Jerusalem. So that's what we've been learning about. We're all the way through the second half of the book now, and we're trying to cover Nehemiah chapters 11 and 12 today. And it's another one of those sections where there's long lists of names. And the first list of names in Nehemiah chapter 11, I'll explain. Verses 1 and 2 explain this long list of names. It says this: "Now the leaders of the people lived in Jerusalem, and the rest of the people cast lots to bring 1 out of 10 to live in Jerusalem, the holy city, while 9 out of 10 remained in the other towns. And the people blessed all the men who willingly offered to live in Jerusalem." And so then that chapter then lists off the names of the people and where they lived in different villages and those who lived in Jerusalem. So Nehemiah is just accounting for some of those things. And then in chapter 12, he starts off that chapter with a long list of names. And he starts listing off the names of the priests and the Levites who served in the temple. And as you read long lists of names, or as you skim over long lists of names, it's a good reminder for why history books are not made up of long lists of names. So we can debate, well, why did we pick this guy and not that guy? But at least we picked a guy and told the story. Because you read off long lists of names, it's not an exciting nor interesting way to tell history. However, it is appropriate to pay attention to the fact that the Bible has long lists of names. Why? Well, perhaps it's a clue into understanding what God values. And God values men like Nehemiah who step forward and lead, but God also values lots of people. And so sometimes he lists off their names. He values Levites and priests, gatekeepers, singers, civic leaders, ordinary families, men of valor who step forward to take on risks. And so as you have these lists of names, as we read through Nehemiah, there is great value to them. It helps us see that God values all human beings, all the ordinary people. Even as we read today, you're going to see a long description of the walls and the gates and how the city was laid out. Those things are important. Historians and archaeologists really actually value these passages. As they dig up ancient ruins of Jerusalem, they can begin to piece together what was what. But our theme for the book of Nehemiah has been God restores what is broken. And in the book, God has already used the people to restore the wall. And in these latter chapters, we're beginning to see how he restores the people. But specifically in Nehemiah 7:4, it said that the city was large and spacious, but there were few people in it, and the houses had not yet been rebuilt. So Nehemiah's got a problem. He's rebuilt the walls. The people are beginning to turn to God. The people are beginning to be rebuilt spiritually. But the city of Jerusalem is empty. Nobody's living inside of it. And so they cast lots so that 1 out of every 10 men has to come back and live in the city. But some of the men step forward and they say, I volunteer. I'll volunteer to go back and live in the city. Now, what's going on here? Why doesn't anybody want to live in the city? Well, the people have been migrating back to Jerusalem for over 100 years. And during that time, they've settled up villages around the city of Jerusalem where they have a life, where they have family land, where they are farming, and where there's businesses and there's a community that they live in. And so quite frankly, people don't want to leave the comforts of where they're living to go and restart their life behind the walls of Jerusalem. They have to build a house. They have to start infrastructure. They have to do all of that work. But the walls exist, and for this to happen, they need men to step forward and be willing to take on this challenge. And so in Nehemiah 11:2, it says they honored those men who stepped forward. And so these men aren't celebrities. They're not heroes. We don't know much about them. These are just faithful men who say, like, there's a need. I'm willing to meet that need. And so if we pause there, just like God's strategy hasn't changed. Even in the church today, there are needs that churches have, right? And so as we have a need, we share those needs. Now, rarely does Northgate Church cast lots and say 1 out of 10 of you are working in the nursery, all right? So just throw your name in the hat, 1 out of 10. We try not to use that recruitment strategy, but I guess it's in the Bible. But you guys step forward, and you work in our nurseries, and as much as coming out on a Wednesday night to work with kids and tell Bible stories and befriend children and guide them in their spiritual journey may not be the thing you want to do on a Wednesday night when you're tired and you haven't eaten dinner yet. Many of you come back out and you serve because you see that there's a need and you see what God is doing and you want to be involved, and so we appreciate that. We try to share the needs as they arise, and so that people can step forward and meet the needs that a church might have. And so what I'm leading to is this piece of paper that hopefully you received as you walked in the door. It's an elder nomination form. And so currently in our church at this time and place, we are in need of more elders on our elder board. We know that Ted Blinderman, who's listed as one of our current elders, is going to step off of this elder board soon. And we need more men to step forward. And so the way that works in the organizational structure of Northgate Church is I'm not the king of the church, right? As much as that would really help things. I'm just kidding. That's a joke. I'm not the king of the church. The elder board is the authority structure of Northgate Church. We're an independent, autonomous, non-denominational church. And so for our structure, it's an elder board that provides that ultimate authority and prayer and care and structure for the church. And we need men to step forward. So the way that works is you can nominate someone. We've gone through and tried to highlight the main points in biblical passages that describe who the elders of the church should be. And those are listed there. And so you can prayerfully consider that. If you want to write names down on here, you can drop them in the offering boxes. If you want to think about it and pray about it, you'll get an email this week that'll link you to a digital form, and you can submit it digitally. But as you nominate, then the elders will review the nominations, and then the way our structure works is then we will then take those nominations that the elder board approves of and bring them back to the members of the church, and then you would then vote on who would be the elders of the church. So that's just a quick tie-in to Nehemiah 11 and 12. There are sections in Nehemiah 11 and 12 about leadership, about ordinary people who are willing to step forward and serve and to take on a responsibility that is needed in the work that God is doing. But I want to shift gears now, really, and not focus on the list of names and the leadership. I really want to focus on the dedication of the wall. And so as you read through Nehemiah 11 and 12, when you get to the end of chapter 12, what they're doing is they're dedicating the wall to the Lord. And so God, in just a short amount of time, empowered these people to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. And so now they're going to dedicate this wall to the Lord. So I'm going to read that section for you. As a warning, it's long and it's a bit dry. And it's going to be some things that are describing the city of Jerusalem, and it's going to be a long list of names. And you're going to be gracious with me while I stumble over hard to pronounce names. All right? Here we go. And at the dedication of the wall of Jerusalem, they sought the Levites in all their places to bring them to Jerusalem, to celebrate the dedication with gladness, with thanksgiving, and with singing, with cymbals, harps, and lyres. And the sons of the singers gathered together from the districts surrounding Jerusalem and from the villages of the Netophathites. Also from Beth Gilgal and from the region of Geba and Asmapheth. For the singers had built for themselves villages around Jerusalem. And the priests and the Levites purified themselves, and they purified the people and the gates and the wall. Then I, Nehemiah, brought the leaders of Judah up unto the wall and appointed 2 great choirs that gave thanks. One went to the south of the wall, to the dung gate, and after them went Hoshaiah and half of the leaders of Judah, and Azariah, Ezra, Meshullam, Judah, Benjamin, Shemaiah, and Jeremiah, and certain of the priests and the sons of the trumpets. Zechariah, the son of Jonathan, the son of Shemaiah, the son of we'll call him Matt. Son of Micaiah, son of Zechar, son of Asaph, and the relatives of Shemai, Azrael, Milai, Galilai, Mai, Nathaniel, Judah, and Hanani, with the musical instruments of David, the man of God. And Ezra the scribe went before them. At the fountain gate they went up straight before them by the stairs of the city of David at the ascent of the wall, above the house of David, to the water gate on the east. And the other choir of those who gave thanks went to the north, and I followed them with half of the people on the wall above the tower of the ovens, the broad wall, and above the gate of Ephraim, and by the gate of Yeshana, and by the gate that they came to a halt at the gate of the guard. So both choirs of those who gave thanks stood in the house of God, and I and half of the officials with me, and the priests Eliakim, Maaseiah, Miniam, Micaiah, Eleni, Zechariah, and Hanani with trumpets, and Maaseiah, Shemai, Eleazar, Uzai, Jehohanan, Malachi, Eliam, and Azar, and the singers sang with Jezreiah as their leader. And as they offered great sacrifices that day and rejoiced, for God had made them rejoice with great joy. And the women and the children also rejoiced, and the joy of Jerusalem was heard from far away. We're just going to stop there. That was a lot. I'll catch my breath. So, again, archaeologists value these passages as they dig up the ruins of the wall so they can begin to piece together what was from these ancient historical documents. Also, it helps us see the names that we've already addressed, but what I really want to focus on is listen to all that music. It talked about singers and choirs, 2 great choirs. Musical instruments, thanksgiving, rejoicing. And then it climaxes in verse 43. They offered great sacrifices that day and rejoiced, for God had made them rejoice with great joy. The women and the children also rejoiced, and the joy of Jerusalem was heard from far away. I think that the dedication of the wall was a joyful event, full of music. And the point I'd like to make for us this morning is simply that God gives his people joy through music, which becomes a witness for the world. To walk through those ideas, first, joy comes from God. It says in verse 43 that God had made them rejoice with great joy. God was the source of their joy. God made them joyful. Notice Nehemiah, where he places the emphasis. He doesn't say that the joy came from the celebration. He doesn't say that the joy came from the restoration of the wall. He doesn't say that the joy came from the music. He says that the joy came from God. There was a gift from God. God was the source of their joy. And you'll see this theme throughout the Bible. Joy comes from God. In Psalm 16:11, it says, "You make known to me the path of life, and in your presence there is fullness of joy." The presence of God is joy. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 12 to 13 makes it very explicit. This is God's gift, to be joyful. It's God's gift to us. To be joyful and do good work during one's life. Also, that everyone should eat and drink and enjoy the benefits of all his labor. So I know there's a bit of a debate currently amongst the women's Bible study of whether or not eating cake is joy. And they can sort that out in their study. But I think there is a way that cake is a gift from God and is joy. It is a gift from God. Galatians chapter 5, verse 22, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, and a whole other list of other things. But the fruit of God's Spirit living within us is joy. Joy is not something we manufacture. Joy is something that comes from God, from within. To illustrate, you might think of a child who is opening up their birthday presents. Right, a young child, and they're ripping open the wrapping paper, and maybe they get a fire truck, maybe they get a video game, maybe they get a brand new bicycle. And it's like a picture of joy, right? Children opening those presents, that is joy. But if you think carefully about the situation, where does the joy come from? And if you look deep enough, is the joy coming from the fire truck, or is the source of the joy the parent who gave the gift? Because there is no joy if the parent doesn't go out there and give that gift. And so if you dig deep enough and you look close enough, the source of the joy is the giver. It's not the gift. The gifts should point back to the giver, and the giver is the source of the joy. And so it is with us, that God is the great giver. And we look all around ourselves in Western Pennsylvania, and you see his gifts every day. You see the rolling hills, and you see the green trees, and you see the sky and the clouds and the sun sets and the sun rises, and you see his gifts all around you, even in the people that are around you. These are all gifts from God. Why? Because he wants you to experience his joy. And so he floods you with his gifts so that you might experience his joy. And every once in a while, it's valuable for us to pause and to think and to realize it's a gift from the giver. We don't want to worship the gift. We want to worship the giver. It's important for us to pause and to pay attention and to dig deep and look at what's the source of the joy, because the gifts can change. Because walls can be rebuilt, and then walls can come tumbling down. And flowers can bloom, and then flowers can die. And health can come, and health can leave. You see, the circumstances can change, the gifts can change, but the giver remains the same. And our joy comes from the giver. He is the ultimate source. Joy comes from God. Joy comes from God, and joy is expressed through music. All through this passage that we read, 27 to 42, Nehemiah tells us that the people gathered at the dedication of the wall, and it was a musical event. There were two great choirs. There were cymbals and harps and lyres. There was trumpets and musical instruments. And it was so loud that the music was spilling outside the walls of the city. As you might imagine, I have heard every complaint there you can give about music, having served as a pastor all of these years. And so these verses sometimes are helpful to say, like, I know it's loud, but sometimes worship is loud. And I know you prefer to hear the piano played, but they use stringed instruments in the Bible. And so we try to create a blend of music and not be too loud, but just loud enough. But this was a musical event, the dedication of the temple. God gave us the gift of music. It's a tool that we can use to express our joy and our grief. But for this morning, it is a tool that we can use to express our joy. And all through Scripture, you see this gift of God popping up. The Exodus, the children of Israel are trapped in slavery in Egypt. And God sets them free from that slavery in Egypt. And they head off to their promised land, and they cross through the Red Sea. And once they get to the other side of the Red Sea, in Exodus chapter 15, Moses leads the people in a song. If you look through the book of Psalms, it's full of music of the people of God. Songs that Jesus would have sung when he was here. And the Psalms are full of this instruction that we ought to sing and to praise and to use music. The King David wrote many of those songs. When he's the king, he organizes worship for the people, and he appoints singers and musicians. The prophets come, and the prophets prophesy during dark days for the people of God. But even the prophets say a day is coming when singing will return. So when Jesus comes, Jesus sings. We're told explicitly at the Passover, as he's headed out to the garden before the cross, as he and his disciples leave the upper room, they sing a hymn. The Apostle Paul, who follows and writes much of the New Testament, we see him in a prison cell singing with joy while he's in shackles. He tells the church explicitly, he says, listen, you need to teach one another in psalms, hymns, and in spiritual songs. And then the Apostle John gets a revelation of heaven. And in his revelation of heaven, this vision, what does he see? But he sees the people of God gathered around the throne of God, singing the praises of God. God himself sings. We're told in Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 17, that God sings over us. Heaven and earth, heaven and nature sing. In Proverbs 38:7, it says that the stars sang together at the creation of the world. Psalm 66:4 says that all of the earth sings praises to God. And you say, well, that's just metaphor. Fine, but have you ever sat on your back deck and just listened? The birds sing, the birds create music. God loves music, and he gave music to his people as a gift. And he created you and I in his image. And that's a deep, complex idea that we're created in the image of God. But you realize we're created in the image of someone who loves music, who created music. And so he created you and I in his image to love music, to create music, to have talents so that we can create music. We are created in his image to make music. And as we do, he knows in his infinite wisdom that it is music that will cause us to remember all that he has said and done. He knows that it is in this gift of music, things that are in our head will move down to our hearts in ways that only music can cause them to travel. God knew that there are things that you just cannot express with words, and yet a song can capture it. And God knew that music would allow an entire congregation to speak with one voice, unified in song. I went to a Pirates game this week. I picked the best game to go to last week. It was the Dodgers on Wednesday night. And we got to see Shohei Ohtani pitch and hit a home run, and yet the Pittsburgh Pirates won the game, coming back in the latter innings. It was amazing, amazing. There was like 30,000 people at the game, and that's pretty big for PNC Park. And so I was thinking about that this week. So there's 30,000 people in PNC Park. That's 30,000 different opinions. That means you've got people on the left and people on the right and people in the center all across the aisle. You've got all kinds of opinions, all kinds of things we could disagree about. 30,000 people all shoved in to one building, sitting shoulder to shoulder. 30,000 split, I'm assuming majority are Pirates fans and Dodgers fans, Republicans and Democrats. But there was two moments where I think 30,000 people were unified. I think it was at the singing of the national anthem in the seventh inning when we sang, "Take Me Out to the Ball Game." And do you see it was music that unified 30,000 people, that caused 30,000 people to stand to their feet and sing with one voice and to remember things that we had forgotten. And when you stand up and sing, "Take Me Out to the Ball Game," and you're standing there with your son and your friends, I'm telling you, singing that song does something that I cannot explain to you in words. It's something about the American spirit, something about just, I don't know, I can't put it into words, but you stand up at the ballpark and you sing, "Take Me Out to the Ball Game." I'm telling you, something that's in your head moves to your heart that you can't articulate with words. And that is the gift that God has given us through music. And that is why corporate worship is so important. That's why God called his people to gather weekly. And when they gather weekly, he told us to sing. And that's why, because he knew in his infinite wisdom that what we needed to do if we were ever going to remember his values, if we were going to ever remember who he is and what he has done throughout time and history, then we needed to sing. Because that's the only way we were going to be able to remember. And he also knew that if we would sing it, these things that are in our head would travel to our hearts, and we would believe them and feel them in ways that we couldn't otherwise. And he knew that for all of the opinions of the 100 people in this room, that we could disagree about a whole number of things right now. But what we can do is we can all unify together as we sing with one voice the gospel, the good news that God loved the world and he sent his one and only Son, so that whoever would believe on him would have eternal life. It is his good gift to us, and he encourages us to sing. Joy is a gift from God, and that joy is powerfully expressed through music, and then joyful music is a witness to the world. In verse 43, it says that the joy of Jerusalem was heard from far away. I love the way it was written here. It doesn't say the music was heard from far away. It says the joy was heard from far away. Joyful music was a witness to all who could hear. The surrounding people, the surrounding nations, They had seen what God had done in the rebuilding of the wall. But it was through the music that they could hear about the God who had done it. Joy was their witness. I was reading this week about the power of music. There's a guy named Gavin Ortland. He's a pastor and an author. I recommend his works to you. Gavin Ortland. He wrote a book called Why God Makes Sense in a World That Doesn't. And in that book, and in various interviews he's given, he highlights the transcendent aspect of music. So I had to look up the word transcendent this week because I can use it, and I think I know what it means, but I was like, I'm not really sure I know what it means. So let me help you out. Transcendent just simply means beyond this world, like beyond the human and the natural world. And so if music is transcendent, then we're saying it points us to something that is beyond the physical, natural world. And so Gavin Ortland makes this argument that this is the power of music is in its transcendence. And so what music does is it points us to something. There's got to be something other than the physical, natural world. And music has this power of transcendence. It's pointing us to something beyond ourselves. And actually, atheists and Christians agree about this point. They agree that music is transcendent. And you've got people that aren't even known for their Christianity making this point. So you can quote men like Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein, after hearing a tremendous violin performance, said these words, "Now I know there is a God in heaven," after he heard the violin being played. Steve Jobs, co-founder of Apple, he once had a private audience with Yo-Yo Ma, who's a world-renowned cellist. And Steve Jobs is quoted as saying, "You playing is the best argument for God that I've ever heard." I don't know, maybe you've had similar experiences where you've heard of music and something moves inside of you that you just can't explain. Steve Jobs says, "I don't know any other better argument for the existence of God." Music is a witness to the world because it points us to something beyond ourselves. Now, secular humanists, atheists, they're forced to explain that from just the natural world. And so their explanations are complex and they have to do with pattern recognition, and I won't go into all of that. But oftentimes it just ends with the argument being like, listen, music is this, we've evolved this thing, and fundamentally what it does for the human species is it's a painkiller. It's a painkiller for the pains of the reality of existing. So it's a respite from the pain of existence that we have evolved the skill set to be able to do. But Gavin Ortland so well argues in his book, he says, well, what if music was more than that? What if the metaphor wasn't painkiller? What if the metaphor was it's a window? What if we are in a prison? And as we sit in our prison cell marked by anxiety and fear and anger, there's a window in the prison cell. And as we look out that window, we can see ultimate true reality and beauty. We can see the sun shining over the mountaintops and the green trees. What if music is a window into something that lies just outside the prison cell that is true and beautiful and is calling to us? What if that's what music is? And I believe that's what it is. And other men have believed the same. Johann Sebastian Bach, he wrote on his music, or much of his music, these words, "To God alone be the glory." Because he believed that the music he created existed to point people to God. He would create masterpieces, and his heart's desire was that as they listened to this amazing Bach piece, that people would experience the transcendent nature of music and be pointed to the Creator God. He believed that the music was a window. We think of music as this gift from God. There's categories that churches have. We think of it as a gift of common grace. Common grace is the gift of God that God gives to all people. It doesn't matter if you're atheist or Christian or any other religion. All of us can receive gifts of common grace. The sun shines on the just and the unjust, and we all get to experience music. But what's happening in Nehemiah chapter 12 is something greater than common grace. What's happening in Nehemiah chapter 12 is when we take the powerful nature of music and then we add to it the worship of God. So then we put into this our motivation. We are so moved with gratitude for what God has done and who he is that we then use music to give him worship to the true and living God. And that's so powerful that when we do that, those even outside of the walls of Jerusalem can hear our joy, and our music becomes a witness. And so the application for you and I is to sing. It's so that our song of worship to God might be heard outside of these walls. And I say that literally and metaphorically. But we live in a world that is marked by anxiety, anger, and fear, cynicism. We are so cynical and afraid. And what the church has to offer is this: music. Music that can turn hearts to what is true and beautiful and lies just outside of that prison cell. That is the opportunity that we have to apply these verses. God is worthy of our praise, and our music can be a great witness to his existence. Nehemiah 12, the dedication of the wall. God gives his people joy. It's expressed through music, and it's a witness to the world. That happened a few thousand years ago. The same thing can happen today. God can so move us with his joy that we express it through worship, and the world will take notice. It was only a few years ago. It was in February of 2023 at Asbury University in Kentucky that a group of college students went to their chapel service and began singing worship to God. And when the chapel service ended, most of the students left, but some lingered and continued to confess sin and continued to sing. And so then they sang through the night and through the day and through the night and through the day. And day after day, they continued to confess their sins and sing worship to God. And there was no contemporary Christian artist leading them. There was no big names on the stage. But what happened was the world started to take notice. And news agencies started to show up. And people began to go on social media and share this moment around the world. And people can debate all they want to what happened at Asbury University that day. But what is undeniable is that the world took notice when God's people gathered to worship. May that be true of us. May God be the source of our joy. May we take his joy and express it through music, and may the whole world take notice. Let's pray.